AV Shop Talk, Episode 7.
Podcasting from Boston, Massachusetts and Los Angeles, California, this is AV Shop Talk. Covering the latest audiovisual trends and emerging technologies, this is where the AV pros come to talk shop. With your hosts, Nate Schneider and Jason Griffin.
Hey there, and welcome to another episode of AV Shop Talk. I'm Jason Griffin, and as usual, I'm joined by Nate. Nate, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, Jason.
Well, we got a great show today. Wanted to take a minute just to welcome new listeners aboard. I know we've been getting a lot of new people coming aboard to AV Shop Talk and checking us out, and so we wanted to thank people for that and welcome them aboard. And we're really excited about the project.
Yeah, a lot of activity on Google Plus and on Twitter, so we really appreciate all the support there. And Jason and I are just two regular AV professionals that are just doing this because we like to do it, and it's fun. And we hope that we're providing valuable service for other AV professionals out there who maybe don't have time to interview other people or call up manufacturers and ask them questions. You can just take the AV Shop Talk podcast along with you and try to stay current with industry trends. So
yeah, absolutely. And if people want to let us know how we're doing, we would absolutely love if they came by the website at avshoptalk.com and left a comment. Also, any suggestions for topics that you might want to hear us cover, we're absolutely all ears. And I think, Nate, you actually had a new widget that you installed on the website that you kind of wanted to mention to our listeners as well.
Yeah, I've been playing around with SpeakPipe. So if you go to avshoptalk.com/SpeakPipe, you can leave us a voicemail. And you can leave us a 90-second voicemail and tell us what you think. You can sing your praises, or you can give us criticism, or tell us a topic that you might want to hear in the future. But we may use your audio in a future episode. So I think one of the things I really love about radio is how you can call in and have this interaction kind of live on air. And with podcasts, you can't really get that because this is pre-recorded. We don't do it live. But if you hear something that you really agree with or you really disagree with, feel free to go over to our SpeakPipe widget and just leave a voicemail through your web browser. And I think it'll be really fun to interact. But this is kind of an experiment, and we'll see how it goes.
Definitely. No, I listened to a couple of other podcasts that have used it before, and it's a great way to have, again, our audience interact, like you said. And so if people want to take a minute to hop over to the website, again, that's avshoptalk.com/SpeakPipe. Leave us a message, and it'll be your chance to be featured on the podcast. So that's kind of fun as well.
Yeah, and even if you hear us say something wrong, I think we try pretty hard to be factual. But if we do ever slip up or say something wrong or misspeak or something, feel free to jump on and let us know.
Call us out.
Yeah, I think we're mature enough to put our egos aside, and we definitely want to hear your corrections in case we mess up. I think I messed up megabits versus gigabits in one episode, and there's a few little things that I've got on my radar. So
how dare you?
I know. It's like I gotta. Once you start pressing that record button, man, everything is just on the internet forever.
You just got to go with it. Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, the SpeakPipe thing will be fun.
Yeah. Most definitely. We got a great show lined up here. We were joined by Todd Ryan, who is the chief speaker engineer at Sonance. And me being involved in high-end residential, I'm very familiar with Sonance product. I've been working with them for a number of years. So it was an interesting conversation, and I actually learned a lot from it.
Yeah. I don't work in residential, but I definitely appreciate these architectural speakers. And Sonance is they were one of the big players when it comes to high-end residential architectural speakers. I think they were actually one of the first ones to bring an architectural speaker to market. So this was kind of a big deal for them. And it was definitely interesting to hear a little bit about how these speakers were made and different materials that goes into the construction of these speakers and how they're designed. So it was great to have Todd on the show. I'm definitely can learn a lot from him. Speaker design is a little bit over my head. I've never designed a speaker, so I learned a lot in this episode.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we all kind of work in AV, and more. Some of us work with this speaker technology more than others, obviously, but I think in general, speaker design is one of those things that it's very specialized, really interesting. There's obviously a whole world to it in terms of selecting materials for the cones and tweeters and all of that. And so it was cool to kind of get a sneak peek into that world. And Todd obviously really knows his stuff and is super passionate about it. Speaker design has been his thing forever. So, I couldn't think of a better guy to come on and have talk about it.
Yeah, I think he's got over 20 years experience designing speakers, and he ran his own company before coming on board with Sonance. So he's definitely knows the business very well. And it was also cool to pick his brain about graphene, which if you've been following the blogosphere and the buzz on the internet, there was this like new material that's in development that's supposed to have great characteristics for reproducing sound or as a transducer. And so it was really good to hear Todd's expert opinion on graphene. So I hope you stick around to hear his take on that.
Yeah, definitely a lot of good stuff in here. So I think we could talk it up all day, but why don't we just go ahead and jump into the interview?
All right, let's do it.
AV Shop Talk.
We'd like to welcome Todd Ryan. Thank you for joining us on the show, Todd. I'll let you just go ahead and give a brief introduction, sort of who you are and what your role is at the company of Sonance.
Well, my name is Todd Ryan. As you said, I am Chief Speaker Engineer. I've been with Sonance for about 20 years in that position. And generally, any speaker product that Sonance has manufactured for the last 20 years is something that I have designed. So if you like them, that's great. And if you don't, it's probably somebody else.
That's great. Yeah. So you've been there for quite a while. I thought it might be interesting if we could just start off the show and talk just real briefly about the relationship, because I know actually Dana Innovations is the parent company of not only Sonance, but also TrueFig, as well as, what is it, iPort?
iPort, yes.
Yeah, so maybe can you talk just briefly about the relationship between those entities?
It's just as you stated. It's very simple. Dana Innovations is the parent company. That name's been around for a very long time. It's just that most of our customers have not been exposed to it. So Dana Innovations existed 30 years ago when Sonance started. It's just that most people weren't aware of it. And so it's just sort of the parent company that encompasses all of those brands. All those brands are the TrueFig, Sonance, and iPort are all engineered in the same building, all managed in the same building, and all the same people are involved with all of those brands.
Oh, awesome. Now, when you mentioned that you've been doing speaker design and acting as the chief speaker engineer there, right off the bat, that sounds like a very cool job. That sounds very interesting for somebody like me who has a background in audio, and I'm a system designer now. Can you tell us a little bit about just how you got into speaker design and kind of what drew you to Sonance before we get into some of the details about the products that you guys are offering right now?
Sure. So, like a lot of people in the audio business, I was interested in audio and in particular speakers when I was much younger, even in my early teens, and that sort of developed into speakers as a hobby and sort of audio as a hobby. And then I worked in audio retail as right my last year in high school. And so that was 40 years ago. So 30 years ago, sorry. So make myself older than I actually am. And, it just sort of grew out of that. And I've always kind of had this fascination with speakers. My education is actually in photography and photojournalism in particular. So That did me absolutely no good. And when it comes to my actual chosen profession, but it's just been something I've always been interested in. And then as time went on and I was interested in audio, I got more interested in sort of high-end audio as it is. And, that sort of just grew and grew. And the whole time I continued to build my own speakers, but I bought other people's speakers, and I was buying pretty high-end equipment for somebody my age. And it sort of spurred me as I got more interested in building speakers, having stuff like Quadius L63s as a reference speaker to use against what I was designing was a great place to start. And so it gave me a really good foundation, having really good equipment and really good speakers to compare it to. So I was very realistic about the product I was designing. And so that sort of started my own speaker company, which I think that started in about 1986. And I had that for about 8 years. It was called Ryan Acoustics, and we did mostly 2-channel high-end speakers. And due to my lack of experience as a businessman, I managed to run that in the ground, so to speak, and then went to work at Sonance. Very happily went to work at Sonance.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like you've got a pretty long history of being a speaker enthusiast. And,
yes.
Wow. So when you were designing these speakers, did you have in mind that you wanted to do like high-end home residential, or were you trying to do like studio monitors, or did you have a specific when you first started out with your own company?
Oh, when I first started out with my own stuff, it was just high-end 2-channel kind of stuff.
Okay.
Back in those days, that was sort of early days of CD and LPs were still moderately popular. And, in those days, big brands back then, which are still somewhat popular today, would be brands like Vandersteen and Teal. On and on. B&W obviously was always pretty popular. And so those are the kind of brands that we were to some degree competing against, or attempting to try to compete against.
Awesome. Nice. So your background is kind of in 2-channel when you first started out, but obviously now working for Sonance, you guys have speakers that cover the complete gamut, all the way, from outdoor speakers to home theater, architectural speakers, so sort of distributed audio. Somebody like me, I come from the high-end residential side, so I'm very familiar with your guys' product. We work with it all the time. But there's a lot of our listeners who work in different facets of audiovisual and may not be as familiar with Sonance and its sort of positioning in the market in general. So maybe can you talk just a little bit in general terms of your speaker design philosophy now at Sonance and kind of where you see yourself on the spectrum of speaker manufacturers?
I think when it comes to, with Sonance being one of the original in-wall, in-ceiling speaker manufacturer, I think we've kind of have always kept our foot in that area and never really ventured very far away from that and tried to specialize in that type of product. And in doing that, that really gives us a lot of focus. We're not a box speaker company that's trying to make in-wall speakers. We're an in-wall speaker company that makes in-wall speakers. And so that puts a lot of focus on just the type of product that we make. And over the last few years in particular, we've really tried to improve the level of performance of the speakers to a point where it just was unimaginable 20 or 30 years ago for an in-wall speaker to sound as good as some of the stuff that we're doing today. And we recognize that, some of our competitors, and there's been a lot of very high performance speaker manufacturers, box speaker manufacturers that have gotten into the custom installation part of the industry. And so with that, they bring all of their technology and their engineering and their acoustic performance. And we know that those are the people that we're really competing against, and we want to play at a level higher than them in our sort of specialized part of the industry.
Right. Yeah. So you guys have the claim to being the makers of the first architectural speaker. And could you speak to maybe just specifically what you mean? Like, how do we define an architectural speaker in that context?
In that context, it would be a speaker that would mount into the wall or ceiling that is unobtrusive. So if you go back and if you ever see one of the original Sonance speaker advertisements, it shows a pair of box speakers on the floor in one part of the ad, and then on the other part, the box speakers are gone and it's replaced with in-wall speakers. And that concept of a speaker being a less visually obtrusive part of a home, but people still being able to enjoy sound is really sort of the foundation of all of this. When Scott Struthers and Jeff Spencer started Sonance, they were basically taking box speakers and cutting the cabinets off and installing them in a wall and putting grills on them, and their customers loved it and thought, hey, we can turn this into a business. And that was sort of the start of the idea of what Sonance has become today.
Yeah, and I come from the commercial side, as Jason said, but I have been known on occasion to install surround sound systems for friends and family that ask me to do so. And I can tell you what, I've done 3 systems probably in the past 5 years, and every single one of them, no matter what speaker I pick, no matter how many 3D renderings I do, you just know that the wife is going to walk into the room and say, oh, those are much bigger than I wanted. Take them down. And so I can totally get why this in-wall thing and this architectural style speaker really caught on, because it's just like every single time I would have to return the speakers that I bought that the husband signed off on, and oh man, it was such a pain. So anyway, that's my experience personally with trying to do some of these architectural things. So I can see how there's a big need for that market out there.
Yeah, you can see how speakers get bigger and bigger, and the guys get happier and happier, and their wives, it's just not. If you have your own room and you've negotiated to be able to decorate it however you want to, that's great. But when you want to have speakers throughout your house, it's really just not practical to have speakers sitting on the floor, on bookshelf, or whatever. It's just architecturally these days, people just don't design houses that way. And so having a custom installed product is really the key to that. Then being able to design, and one of the things that Sonance has done really well over the years is to continue to evolve the aesthetic part of the product as well. So, for a long time in the industry, the standard was just a big flange with a grill stuck in it. And, about 10 years ago, we came up with the first architectural series speakers, and then very shortly after that, we came up with the visual performance speakers. That look of the visual performance speaker sort of was revolutionized the industry. Now every brand has a product that looks like that. And I think that's kind of another unique thing about Sonance is that we have continued to innovate, not only in the sound quality, but also in the aesthetic part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk, and we kind of joke a little bit, but we talk about the sort of the wife acceptance factor and all that. But really also in high-end residential, or just in residential in general, a lot of times what you're dealing with is not only maybe a disapproving wife, but it's also the architects and the designers who are particularly touchy about the look of speakers and how it affects the aesthetic of the house. So just as its name implies, the architectural series is really, geared for that, and it's geared to go in with very minimal visual impact, and it sounds great. So could you talk maybe just a little bit about the architectural series in general and kind of the design philosophy behind that speaker, and sort of just in general how it installs and how it finishes out?
So the general idea with the architectural series is that it's a little bit more complicated process for installation, but what you wind up with in the end is something that's very visually unobtrusive. And so the basic installation process is it uses what we call a mounting platform to mount the speaker into. And the mounting platform basically functions as like almost as if it's like a patch in the drywall. It replaces a section of the drywall, or they drywall around it, tape the edges of the mounting platform and mud over it. And then basically there's a sanding shield that's included with the mounting platform. You mud over the front surface of it and then sand down to the sanding shield. And what you wind up with is a perfectly flat, in the world of drywall, they have different levels for finishes. And so with that, you can actually get a level 5 finish to the front surface of the speaker. Then there'll be the cutout for the grill, and it's all very clean, very visually unobtrusive. And one of the things that a lot of people describe it as, in particular designers, is it's zero sight line. So in other words, when you look down the surface of the ceiling, there's no grill protruding from the front surface of the speaker. The grill is perfectly flush with the ceiling surface. Lighting these days, there's lots of brands of lighting that are installed the same way. And so when you get a very high house with a lot of architectural elements in it, it's a very high style house, that type of installation process becomes almost a necessity so that the speakers blend in with the ceiling just as well as the lighting does.
Right. Yeah, I've worked with the architectural series on a number of occasions, and it really does finish out nicely. It can be a bit of a challenge with some of the drywall guys that I've worked with, struggle with it a little bit. But really, if you get a good or even a decent drywall guy in there that kind of knows how to float it out and get that nice flush finish, they look beautiful. And as far as, again, as the architects and designers go, I mean, it's a no-brainer. If you show it to them, they love it. For people who may not be familiar with it, we'll include a link to this series of speakers in our show notes. But Could you maybe talk a little bit, because I know you guys have a new iteration of the architectural series coming out, and it's a speaker line that's been out for a while. So maybe you can talk just a little bit about what's changing in this next iteration.
Sure. So the line right now is there's quite a few models in the line, and we're going to greatly simplify the line. And so the entry level model in the new architectural series is a 3.5-inch two-way speaker with a really high excursion woofer. And then in addition to that, there's a 6-inch dual voice coil subwoofer. All of the speakers, the subwoofer and the satellite speakers, all vent out through a 4-inch grill. So the subwoofer and the satellite speakers all use exactly the same size grill. The grill is 4 inches, either round or square. The same speakers used in both the round or the square mounting platform, as we talked about earlier. And it's just a very clean, simple, very small opening system that has great performance. The step up from that will be a 6-inch two-way speaker. We call the AS68. It'll be available also round or square. Then to go from there, we go up to the AS68 plus an 8-inch dual voice coil bandpass subwoofer. The bandpass subwoofer in this case vents out through the same size opening as the AS68 speaker does, giving you tremendous amount of performance with extension, low bass extension down to about 30 hertz. So it's a very full range system. You can use either with the smaller system or the larger system. You can use 4 of the satellites with 1 of the subwoofers. So you get a lot of coverage and a lot of good bass extension out of these very small. It's a really unique concept, and it's something not unlike what we've done with our landscape series speakers, where it's a combination of satellites and subwoofers to get really good coverage throughout a listening area.
Wow, that's pretty neat that they do come in square or round. How important is that for your clients out there? I mean, is lighting fixtures, is that what's driving the shapes of these speakers, or is there some other factor that, you know, causes people to want square versus round speakers?
I think you absolutely, it's lighting is what drives the choice of the shape of the product more than anything. I think if there's no other visual elements in the ceiling, people probably don't have as much opinion about it. But lighting these days tends to be square, and the speakers blend right in. Most of the lighting these days is the bezel for the lights are about 4 inches square as well. So the new smaller system is exactly the same size as the lights. So you can imagine a ceiling plan laid out with lights and speakers all exactly the same size. It has a real nice continuity to it aesthetically.
Yeah, I can imagine how they would just kind of blend in at that point, and you know, wouldn't really be distracting to the eye if they were matching the lights. So that, I guess that kind of makes sense. Could you maybe talk a little bit about, you know, the materials and that go into speaker design and how you approach these different materials? I mean, I am clueless when it comes to speaker design. I've never done this type of thing before. I love speakers. I love audio, designing systems. But when it comes to actually designing a speaker, it's not something I'm very familiar with. So what are the materials that you guys use, if you can disclose that? I don't know if you have any proprietary things.
Sure. So obviously in a speaker, there's lots of different materials that get used. Most of the things that people talk about, though, tend to be like the woofer cones or the tweeter domes. Mm-hmm. Over the last few years, we've tended to use a lot of laminated cones. When you look at speakers, obviously there's thousands of speakers out there and hundreds of brands. Mm-hmm. Speaker companies have a tendency to pick cone materials and kind of stick with them. The overriding goal for a cone would be the two sort of most important things. One would be that it's very stiff, and the second is that it's light. And those two things, usually people have a tendency to gravitate towards something like aluminum or Kevlar as a material. The only downside with those materials is that because of their stiffness and being light, they have a tendency to resonate. And so in the final design of a speaker, you can really hear that coloration that those cone materials have. And so most aluminum cone speakers, when you listen to them, if you listen to them very carefully, they do have a tendency to have a very sort of aluminum coloration. It may be very slight, it may be very pronounced, depending on how effective the design was. So what we've done is that we've taken two really stiff materials and then bonded them together. The two materials are very dissimilar from each other. So in the case of on a new visual performance speaker, for instance, one of the models uses a Kevlar cone on the outside with a Nomex cone on the inside that are laminated together. Those two materials have very dissimilar stiffness. And so the combination of the two of them produces a cone that's got very smooth frequency response and no substantial breakup anywhere throughout its range. And so it's very uncolored. No matter how hard you push the speaker doesn't have any real character of its own. And this is sort of an overriding goal when you're a speaker designer, is you want to try to design a speaker that's as accurate as an amplifier or a piece of electronics. Speakers have a tendency to be probably the absolute most colored part of an audio system. And so as a speaker designer, your real overriding goal is to try to make it as neutral as possible. Some of that's distortion, some of it's the frequency response and how you choose to balance the speaker and design the crossover. Some of it, though, comes down to the choice in materials that you use. And so we've chosen these materials so that they have as little coloration as possible. So we were just talking about the architectural series. In those particular speakers, we use a cone that's a laminate of carbon fiber and a material called Roacell. Roacell is a structural foam that was developed for the U.S. military. And it's very stiff, very rigid, and also obviously very light. But it has, used by itself, it has some substantial breakup problems up in the upper mid-range area. But bonded onto the carbon fiber, it produces a great stiff cone that is very light and has great rigidity and doesn't have any natural breakup to it. And so we get this very uncolored response. And we combine that, in the case of the new architectural series speakers, with a ceramic dome tweeter. Now, in the case of tweeters, you really are, in this situation, really trying to find materials that are as light as humanly possible, and stiff, because obviously a tweeter needs to have very low moving mass to be able to reproduce high frequencies. So it's a combination of trying to pick materials that are stiff and light, and in this case, you don't really have a lot of options for damping because it would add too much weight. So it's really a big search to try to find this sort of perfect dome material to make tweeters out of. So in the case of the new architectural series speakers, we're using ceramic. In the new visual performance speakers, we use ceramic, and we use powder-coated aluminum. So we've used, over the years in my history throughout Sonance, we've used just about every kind of cone material, dome material that you can imagine for speakers.
Wow. I think that's really fascinating for most of us, because there's very few people who have really intimate knowledge of that level of detail when it comes to speaker design. Can you talk a little bit about, like you made mention there, that a lot of speaker companies will kind of find a material that works and they'll just sort of stick with it. And then at the end there, you kind of close by saying Sonance is, kind of evolving. Are you guys continuing to evolve? I mean, I would imagine that selecting material for woofers and tweeters is just sort of this constantly evolving process, and there's probably no single holy grail. So are you guys just continuing to always research this? I mean, how does that process sort of work when you're sitting down at the drawing table to come up with a new line of speakers?
Absolutely. We're definitely always testing out new cone materials. Obviously, we manufacture our speakers in Asia, and we have a lot of really close relationships with the cone suppliers, which is really good. Most of our competitors, they have a tendency to just go to Asia and say, okay, here's what we want to build. We get much farther into this process. I personally spend about 6 to 8 months in China a year. And because of that, I'm able to get a lot farther into the details and talk to the cone suppliers, talk to the dome suppliers, talk to the magnet suppliers and all this, and these sort of people, and find out what the latest things that they have available are. Now, there's stuff that you can read about on the internet, cutting edge materials and stuff like that. But when it comes down to it, sooner or later, there's a practical side to it, and you have to be able to buy it and use it in a speaker and be able to afford to use it in a speaker. And so being there and being able to see what new materials are coming out and getting samples of them and building new stuff, it's great because we can, save those materials to some degree as in a catalog and say, okay, on this new series of speakers, we really want to use something that has this type of performance and be able to go back and use that cone material or dome material, as the case may be.
Yeah, I've been noticing in the past, 6 months or year, on some of these tech blogs and tech websites out there. I think one of them was geek.com, but they were talking about this new material that could potentially be used in speakers. I believe it was called graphene. And,
yes.
I know nothing about how this could be used, but it seemed like the article was a little bit misleading because it talked about using this material in speakers. But then when they actually did a test and set up a prototype, it seemed like it was actually like an earbud that they were testing.
Yeah. So that particular article, they designed a pair of headphones, and what the headphones were was actually like a ribbon driver. So one of the unique benefits of graphene is that it's conductive. And so you're able to, much like you would in a traditional ribbon tweeter or a planar type of headphone, you're able to use that graphene material to be the diaphragm. And so in that case, in a very small diaphragm that you'd put in a headphone, that material could be fantastic because typically what they're having to do is to make a really high-end headphone. We're not talking about $40 headphones. We're talking, $1,000, $1,500 headphones.
Yeah,
but what they typically... Go ahead.
No, that's where the material cost comes in, like you said before. Even if there was this magical element that or new product or new material that was developed, some hybrid, like graphene, for example, if it costs, $1,000 for a square inch of it, it's not going to solve any problems anytime soon.
No, not unless somebody's willing to pay, whatever, $100,000 for a pair of in-wall speakers in our case. Right. So, those materials like graphene, you can use it. It would be a substitute for something like a ribbon tweeter, potentially for headphones, like a planar headphone or something like that. Mm-hmm. How it could be implemented in a traditional cone driver or tweeter dome still probably needs to be researched. Its conductivity is not really that important in that case. Being light is great, but then there's a certain balance in the design of speaker drivers, not to get too far into it, but in the design of speaker drivers, you actually need some mass to the driver to be able for it to reproduce. Let me say this the right way so it doesn't sound confusing. When you design a speaker driver, the weight of the cone is a factor in the overall parameters of the driver itself. So if you made a woofer cone that had zero moving mass, the speaker would have no bass, virtually. So you still need speaker drivers themselves, woofers and tweeters, are still a matter of a bunch of dozens of different parameters that are all linked together, and one affects the other, and they're all you can't really compromise one without compromising another. So it gets very complicated. But the reality is that without some moving mass, the speakers wouldn't have bass the way that we know it today. Tweeter, kind of a different story. You're not really expecting it to go that low. But a woofer, for instance, you really can't make a massless woofer.
Yeah. Well, thank you for speaking on that, because it was something
Sure.
that I was curious about. I'm like, oh, this new material could, completely change, speaker design. And I'm, looking at the projected frequency responses, and people are talking about it in forums and everything, and I'm glad we had you on the show to kind of spell out where things are and kind of give your expertise to this subject, because I was curious about that.
Sure, my pleasure.
Yes, we've talked in general about speaker design quite a bit. I know you guys have one other pretty new product coming out that looks actually really cool, and that's the new Soundbar. Can you touch on the Soundbar and sort of what makes that product unique? I know it's got the adjustable width thing, which is really cool because we're always struggling with that in high-end residential and trying to match our sound bars, our LCR bars, to the width of all these different TVs. It's a very time-consuming process to specify, and this product looks like it's geared to sort of solve that issue.
Yeah, we sort of approached the design of the soundbar to be one solution in a box, where you can just buy, well, there's two models depending on the size of the television. But once you make that decision, you buy this one box, you can take it out and install it on any TV. The brackets are all included. Everything is there. So the basic concept for the soundbar uses an extruded aluminum enclosure for the soundbar itself. And one of the things is we've improved the sound quality of all the other in-wall and in-ceiling speakers and our landscape speakers. We really wanted to try to produce a very high-performance soundbar from an audio standpoint. And what we did is used 3 coaxial 4-inch mid-ranges with a 1-inch tweeter at the center of the mid-range for the left, center, and right. Then there's a pair of 4-inch woofers for the left, center, and right as well. So the driver complement for the left, center, and right is all identical. One of the unique things about this 3-way soundbar is that the coax drivers are at the ends of the soundbar, so you get really good separation, even though the soundbar's, just the size of the television. Most soundbars, most of our competitors are building soundbars that are 2-way speakers, and in that case, they tend to have a mid-range driver out at the end of the speaker, then the tweeters 4 or 6 inches in from the end, and potentially another woofer on the other side of that. So they tend to have a much narrower soundstage than our soundbar does. So from an acoustic standpoint, we really tried to go over the top and making it very, very high performance. Then to make it really easy for the installer and for the people doing the purchasing of the soundbars, we designed it so that the grill, there's a center section of grill that's fixed, a left and right grill that slide in underneath it. It's all very, very unobtrusive. And the 2 left and right grills slide in underneath it. And so the smaller soundbar can adjust from a 50 to 65-inch TV, and the larger soundbars from a 70 to 80-inch TV. And so it makes it really easy. The brackets are included in the box. The grill slides to match the width of the TV. So it's a pretty simple process. Take the TV, place it face down, mount the soundbar and the mounting bracket for the TV on the back of the television. There's some set screws on the back of the side grills. You loosen those screws, slide the grill out to match the TV, tighten the screw down, and hang the TV, and away you go.
Right. So it sounds like there's like 3 basic configurations for mounting that you guys see, either like hugged up against the TV, maybe on a credenza, or just mounted right on the wall. So you kind of have the flexibility to do any of that?
Yeah, there's even one. Yes, there's one step beyond that. We include 2 brackets to mount it on the TV. One bracket's just flush with the back of the TV. It's just a real simple bracket in case you're using a really shallow wall mount. Mm-hmm. I know some of the wall mounts today are less than an inch deep, and that bracket would work in that application. The other bracket that we include has a slight bend to it, and it allows you to adjust the front plane of the soundbar to be flush with the front of the television. And so if you have a bracket that's deep enough, potentially like a pivoting bracket or something like that, and the aesthetic of the front surface of the TV and the soundbar is very important to you, you can use this other bracket and adjust the depth of the soundbar to match the front of the TV.
Oh, okay. So that is an interesting topic there, with the TVs getting thinner and thinner and thinner. You know, your amount of real estate that you have to make good sound is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So that sounds like it must be a challenge.
Yes, it's definitely a very difficult thing to do, is to make a really good sounding speaker that's very shallow. You have the drivers, the woofers, and the tweeters. The tweeters not that big a deal, but the woofers to engineer to try to make them perform well, even though they're shallow. But what's even more of an issue is that the box keeps getting smaller and smaller, so the amount of bass that you can generate just goes down. And so you wind up with a soundbar, potentially if you made one that was only an inch deep or something, you wouldn't have very much bass. It would probably not make very many people happy. So our new soundbar is 2.5 inches deep, which is still about the depth of most of the TVs these days.
Yeah,
so it'll be interesting.
Pretty small.
It's pretty shallow. Considering it has 4-inch drivers in it, it's pretty shallow. It'll be interesting to see where TVs go. That'll definitely be a big challenge for us in the future if they keep getting shallower.
Yeah, well, we wanted to thank you for joining us, Todd. We appreciate your time and your jumping on the call with us.
My pleasure, anytime.
Yeah, and before we maybe close out this interview here, is there anything you wanted to share about what you do in your spare time when you're not designing speakers, just to kind of lighten things up. It's always interesting to see, what people are doing and, for work, and then also maybe what they enjoy for their hobbies too.
So ironically, one of my hobbies still happens to be high-end audio. So
you can't get away from it.
I know I can't get away from it. I'm not sure what's wrong. I must be something wrong with me. So I still have a lot of records and a couple turntables and tube amps and just crazy stuff. And but then with all good single guy hobbies, I collect watches and wine and camera equipment and
very cool,
et cetera, et cetera. So so I have my my fair share of guy hobbies.
Very good. So it sounds like you get to, work on a product that really, you're an audio guy and you get to work on audio all the time. So that's great. Sounds like a great fit.
Yeah, it's been great so far. I really do enjoy what I do. It's very challenging. Obviously, Sonance has very high standards, and we're trying to do the best job that we can, and really, try to have happy customers. If nothing else, in the end, it's a speaker and it's reproducing music, and it's a person listening to that music in their house. And I mean, seriously, that's really what it's all about, is somebody enjoying the products that we design and sell. So, and that you guys install. So, it's not rocket science. And in the end, it really does come down to just people enjoying what you do.
Absolutely. Well, Todd, thanks again for taking the time to come join us on the show. If anyone in our audience wanted to reach out to you to kind of follow up and ask any other questions, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Email is always the best way to contact me. And my email address is very simple. It's todd@sonance.com.
Awesome. And we will include that in the show notes. And again, thank you so much for coming on to join us, Todd. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. So that's it for our conversation with Todd Ryan. And I hope everyone learned something about speaker design.
Yeah, I definitely found it interesting that they use two materials together, kind of like in a hybrid fashion to, bring new properties, new sonic properties to the speaker. I think speaker design is one of those things that, if I had another life and I could start all over again and pursue something, I think that would be like really interesting.
I agree. And when you hear a guy like Todd talk about it, it sounds fun and really challenging and interesting, and to balance all of these aspects that in today's world they have to balance. Like, it's not always just about making a really great speaker. It's also about making a speaker that looks good, especially when you operate in the world that we do in high-end residential. It's very, very critical. And not even just in high-end, but in residential in general, and even in commercial, the speakers have to blend in with the aesthetic of whatever building they're going into. And that presents a whole new level of challenges, especially with things like invisible speakers and the architectural series that we touched on. So I thought that was interesting as well, just learning about how they have to balance those two worlds and really kind of strive to walk that line.
Yeah, I mean, people expect the sound to sound amazing from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and by the way, you can only make a speaker that's 2.5 inches deep because the displays are getting so thin these days. So it definitely sounds like it comes with its fair share of challenges to be a speaker designer in the current market and technology season that we're in right now, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you touched on, a lot of times it's us guys who really don't care how it looks. We just want it to sound really good. But you touched on that one key factor, didn't you? The wife acceptance factor.
Yeah, I probably should apologize to the women in AV out there. It's just my experience has been I have been vetoed by the husband has signed on to the speaker design. They've approved of it. Even the wife has, and then I actually install them, and it gets vetoed.
Hey, it was all in good nature. It's just one of those things. All right. Well, again, we hope everyone enjoyed the show. If you're interested in checking out more of our shows, you can, of course, find us on iTunes or cruise on over to avshoptalk.com, where we have all the other episodes listed there. And of course, you can leave us a comment and let us know how we're doing and make suggestions about future topics.
Yeah, definitely make use of that speak pipe. Leave us a voicemail with AV Shop Talk /speakpipe if you want to be heard on a future episode.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll have to come up with some sort of incentive. Maybe we'll announce it on Twitter for our first SpeakPipe voicemail. Maybe we can kind of put a carrot on a stick out there for people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping to hear from some of the Red Band guys. I mean, these guys will go on and on about all kinds of stuff. So hopefully they'll be able to like, click record.
I know they've got an opinion on something that we've talked about. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, as well, of course, we're on Twitter at AV Shop Talk. And I believe also we're up on Google Plus now, Nate. Is that correct?
We are. We've got the Google Plus page going, and a lot of great AV professionals chiming in over there and giving us a +1. So we appreciate you guys doing that.
Yep. And lastly, I will say that if you're enjoying the show, this episode or any past episode, we would greatly appreciate if you took a minute to go over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. It would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, or a 4-star review. It doesn't have to be 5. I mean,
or a 3 or a 2. Whatever you think we deserve. But obviously, a 5 would be fantastic.
Yeah, we would appreciate it. Now that about wraps it up. Thank you guys so much for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode. The AV Shop Talk podcast is produced independently by Jason Griffin and myself, Nate Schneider. Musical contributions coming from Colin Owens, and voiceover talent coming from John Perry.
This is where the AV pros come to talk shop.
AV Shop Talk.